South Korea, a free country since 1953 and a democracy after the winning of the war against North Korea. The two countries are finally separated, which is only about half true. You see, after the Korean War, South Korea was actually under a military authoritarian rule until the June Democratic Struggle of 1987, which actually resulted in South Korea becoming this bustling democracy that it is today. What led up to this event, though? And what even is that event? Why was it the final tipping point that Korea would no longer be a military ruler, and just why
Hello.
in general?
Okay. Hello. I'm Choi. Uh, I'm Gadget's grandmother's cousin. I was working in administrative affairs at Yangju City Hall in Korea during the democratic uprising in June 1987. I worked there for about 4 years and I'm now retired.
When were you in Korea?
We were there from 1978 to 1982, so a total of 4 years.
Throughout 1948 and 1960, Korea's first republic was active. This was a presidential system, and Syngman Rhee was subsequently elected as South Korea's first president. Who he was elected during the war in about 1952, but Rhee and the opposition dominated the National Assembly and had some conflicts even before the war. The dispute involved a constitutional amendment that the opposition introduced attempting to oust Rhee by replacing the current presidential system with a parliamentary cabinet system. The bill wasn't able to go through, unfortunately, but the dispute continued at Busan, the wartime capital, where the National Assembly reconvened. There are many stories from locals, although most normal Koreans weren't affiliated with politics, but they still have their own stories. When the opposition introduced another amendment bill in favor for the parliamentary cabinet system, Rhee, in again 1952, countered by pushing a bill that provided the popular election for the president. He was then president for more terms, being a president for a total of 4 terms. After the fourth, massive student demonstrations took place in a major event on about April 19th, which many demonstrators of Rhee resigned under the pressure. About 6 days later, he would flee to exile in Hawaii, where he died in 19... Then there was this Second Republic, which didn't last very long, lasting only about 9 months. The Second Republic had adopted this parliamentary cabinet system that the First Republic tried so hard to reenact. The figurehead president was elected by both houses of the legislature, and the power was shifted to the office of one Chang Myon, who was accumulated over a very, very long period of time. However, the reforms could just not keep up and failed to cope with the unstable situation created by a very violent political change. Plus, rampant political factionalism only made everything worse. After all of this, and more, it made it so before Chang could have a full time to launch this program with economic reform, leadership of the ruling Democratic Party was crippled, and a failure strife within their own ranks. May 16th, 1961. The military has now seized power through a very carefully engineered coup, ushering the new phase of post-liberation Korean politics. The military leader at this time, Park Chung-hee, took over the government machinery, dissolved the National Assembly, and imposed a very strict ban on all political activity.
So, what was your opinion on the authoritarian government before 1987?
1987, 1987년 전의 권위주의적인 정치를 당신은 어떻게 생각합니까?
권위주의 정부 시절의 정부는 특히 경제적 목표 달성이라는 부분에서는 긍정적으로 생각하며 그게 우리나라의 경제적 기틀을 마련했다고는 생각을 합니다.
I think the authoritarian government period, especially the government, was positive in terms of achieving economic goals, and I credit it with laying the foundation for growth.
All right, that's all the questions.
In the country, it was a authoritarian leadership, was it?
Right. Park Chung-hee was the dictator and known mostly as a benevolent dictator. Now, if you were his political enemy, you wouldn't, he was not very benevolent. There was opposition. There was an opposition party to him, and they got jailed on a regular basis. Though I'm going to say guys because it was mostly men. Who were actively working against the dictatorship, but they were getting nowhere because he had total authority to have anybody arrested at any time. He's just for the most
In November of 1962, the SCNR made a public constitutional amendment bill that provided for a strong president and a weak single-chamber National Assembly. The bill was actually approved by a national referendum 1 month later. After a bit of this military rule, the USA got involved, pressuring Park into hosting an election. The election for the president for the Third Republic would take place on October 15th of 1963. Park actually was able to narrowly defeat the opposing candidate, Yoon Poo-sun, former president from 1960 to 1962 of the Second Republic, who had remained in office as the figurehead at the request of the junta to provide a constitutional continuity for the military government. During his second term, President Park faced the constitutional provision that limited the president to 2 consecutive 4-year terms. Then, in the presidential elections held in April of 1971, Park defeated one Kim Dae-jung of the NDP. However, the NDP made substantial gains, especially in major urban areas, securing 89 seats in the National Assembly election against 113 seats won by the ruling DRP. All of this would lead up to June 10th. The struggle was ignited by 3 very major incidents: the torture and death of Park, the April 13th declaration to uphold the authoritarianism constitution, and the death of student protester Lee Han-yeol after being hit by a tear gas canister. On the day of June 10th, the Chun Doo-hwan regime announced that Roh Tae-woo, a key political ally of Chun, would be the ruling party's presidential candidate, and that on the same day, a large-scale demonstration broke out at Seoul City Hall Square. Opposition leaders, university students, and office workers in their 30s took to the streets. The protests quickly spread nationwide after the 10th. An average of 100 protests took place daily across all of South Korea. An estimated 4 to 5 million people joined in on these protests. Eventually, the Chun Doo-hwan administration had no choice but to accept the request for an amendment to direct the presidential election through the system on June 29th, 1987. Declaration of Democracy. After the amendment through the direct election system, Korean society entered the full-fledged democratization, finally ending the military rule. June 1987 actually isn't very talked about when Korea is brought up. Usually it's either on current Korea with their bustling democracy that's very apparent today, or the war. But it's not really talked about how it became like this. The war is usually credited, but 1987 has the biggest impact on current Korea. They would probably look a lot more like North Korea if it wasn't for these uprisings. The reforms that happened after all of these protests are the reason that it's so rich in its own history and very involved with U.S. history. June 1987 was a very pivotal moment and had finally, after all these years, after about five different republics, this one